Let me get the person that's going to swab your hands real quick. And then we'll do that and get those handcuffs off of you, okay?
Okay.
You need something?
I'll just sit here and wait.
Okay, you need something to drink or anything?
Please.
Water, okay?
Anything. I just want... I'm so confused.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Paton, a self-proclaimed genius, and he's going to be performing for you today. He'll be playing the part of a confused husband and father, someone who made it out of a home fire where his family died and he can't remember what happened. He's already set the stage for you by stating out loud, quote, "I'm so confused," which is totally what someone in this situation would say. So let's give him a hand for that.
This is who I was talking about, was going to take a swab of your hands, okay? You okay with her doing that?
Whatever gets me answers. What's happening?
Okay. We're going to let her do this and get out of here, and then I'm all yours to answer any question you have, okay, buddy?
When Michael, who goes by Mike, was brought into the stations, his hands were covered with paper bags. That was to ensure they could test for gunshot residue. When the investigator explained that his hands would be swabbed, Mike said, quote, "Whatever gets me answers of what's happening." Since, he's so confused about what happened to his family. It wouldn't take long for investigators to unravel the facts of the crime, though, because it would turn out that Mike is not a very good actor. This is Monsters. Michael Patrick Paton was born in November of 1983 in Aurora, Colorado. He and Tamara Jo Paton, who went by TJ, had been together since their teens and married not long after they graduated from high school. Mike went on to join the United States Marine Corps working in communications. He told investigators that he was never deployed because of an injury. He said he got a bad ankle sprain while prepping for deployment, and his recovery pushed him past the deployment window. How convenient. While serving in the Marines, Mike and TJ had 2 children, Kendall, who was born on August 23, 2006, and Evan, who was born on July 11, 2007. It was reported that Evan had a high-functioning level of autism, and Mike said that he didn't start speaking until he was 4 years old. Mike ultimately served for 6 years before being discharged and enrolling in community college in Colorado. He moved on to an engineering program at the University of Northern Colorado, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in 2015. At the same time, TJ studied nursing at Ames Community College, where she graduated as a registered nurse in 2014. From there, the Pattons moved to Salina, an area just north of Dallas, Texas, and Mike began working for the defense contractor Raytheon. TJ continued her nursing education at the University of North Texas. In 2001, both Mike and TJ were working remotely due to the COVID pandemic. Mike was reviewing work, ensuring potential projects didn't have any errors before being submitted, and TJ was doing telehealth. Kendall was a freshman at Salina High School and was a competitive swimmer, having earned a number of awards. Evan attended Salina Junior High and was a black belt in Taekwondo. Mike and TJ's marriage was on the rocks, and it was reported that TJ wanted to file for divorce, but she was afraid that Mike would harm himself. Over the years, Mike had had occasional thoughts of suicide, and TJ believed that her husband was only a threat to himself, but soon she would learn just how wrong she was. In February of 2021, the couple got into an argument, and Mike decided it was time to take drastic action. Mike didn't harm himself, and he was likely never at risk of doing so. He seems like the type of person who would use threats of suicide in order to get what he wanted, which is common with manipulative people. It was later revealed that TJ was communicating with someone online who she had started to have romantic feelings for. That person lived out of state and they had never met in person, so there was no physical affair, but the feelings were there. TJ had texted her best friend Heather Weber at about 6:30 p.m. on the evening of the 19th, telling her that she finally told Mike that it was over. There was a fight, but this time Mike didn't threaten his own life. Instead, Mike retrieved a 9mm handgun and shot TJ, Kendall, and Evan, killing them. Then he set the house on fire. At about 7:20 p.m. on February 19, 2021, Mike called 911 and stated, quote, "I just killed my whole family. I did what I did." He went on to tell the dispatcher that he and his wife had gotten into an argument and then he woke up with a gun in his hand. He said that his wife was in a closet, but he wasn't sure where his children were. He also stated that the master bedroom was on fire. He said that he didn't remember what had happened. And that was where Mike began the acting job of his life, pretending that he was confused about what had happened, like he had murdered his family in some sort of fugue state. While on the phone with the dispatcher, he walked out of his house and placed the 9mm handgun in the bed of his truck. Sergeant Jeremiah Phillips arrived on the scene while Mike was still on the phone with 911. He ordered Mike to get on the ground and Officer Scott Callender placed him in handcuffs. Sergeant Phillips quickly asked Mike questions about where his family was and where the gun was. Mike told him his family was in the house and the gun was in the bed of the truck. The sergeant made entry through the front door of the house, but as soon as he was inside, he was met with thick black smoke. There was no way the officer would be able to make his way through the house and was forced back outside. 2 other officers tried to get into the house as well. One smashed out a window at the northwest corner of the house and yelled inside for any occupants. After hearing nothing, he went to the back of the house and helped another officer try to get in that way, but they were unsuccessful. Sergeant Phillips tried to get more information about the exact whereabouts of the family and then proceeded to get the scene ready for the fire department. Neighbors were evacuated from nearby houses and asked to move their cars off the road. Then patrol officers blocked the road from civilian traffic. Sergeant Phillips gave the firefighters as much of the information that he could about where Mike's wife and children might be, but he knew it would be a recovery and not a rescue. When the fire department arrived on the scene, the fire in the house was fully involved in the master bedroom and above the master. When firefighters went into the house, there was absolutely no visibility. They made entry by staying low and crawling through the residence. When they made it to the stairwell, they began crawling on their hands and knees. As they started their climb, they bumped into something on the stairs, so they started feeling with their hands and located a young female victim. She was laying on the stairs on her left side up against the banister. They rolled her over to assess her, where they observed blood on her head and face and a large deformation on her forehead. They observed she was deceased and moved upstairs to locate more victims and combat the fire. Due to heavy smoke and no visibility, they were not able to locate the male juvenile upstairs. When they came back down the stairs, they picked up the female victim and carried her to the front door, where she was passed off to 2 other firefighters. 2 groups of firefighters went back into the burning house to fight the fire and attempt to locate survivors or victims. They went back upstairs and the second team was able to locate the juvenile male. He was in a bathroom upstairs that connected the media room to his bedroom. The door going from the media room into the bathroom had been forced open, with the door jamb broken prior to the fire department's arrival. It seemed as though Evan might have locked himself in the bathroom after the shooting started, and Mike kicked the door in to be able to murder his son. When the firefighters made entry into the bathroom, they found him lying on his right side with his head close to the door leading into his bedroom, and the shower curtain was covering half of the body. There was a family pet, a black pug, laying deceased next to his body. There was a large amount of blood around the male juvenile's head. The firefighters picked up the victim along with the dog and carried them to the front door. They were passed off to 2 other firefighters. As firefighters were combating the fire in the master bedroom, they observed the adult female lying on her back in the master closet. They approached her and observed scorched skin on her with blood around her head. They made the assessment she was beyond saving and left her in that location. They were able to extinguish the fire in hot spots a short time later, and that's when the house was released to the police department for their investigation. While Mike was being held across the street from his burning home, Officer Callender tried to ask the suspect questions, but Mike was already deep in character. Anything that was asked of him, he just responded, quote, "I don't know." He didn't know who he had shot, where his kids were, or how many rounds he had fired. The fire department was on the scene pretty quick and spent hours trying to put out the blaze. By the time detectives arrived at about 8:30 p.m., both children's bodies had been pulled from the home and were lying on a neighboring driveway, covered with a tarp. TJ was still in the house. While the firefighters were still hard at work, other detectives were at the police station working on an arrest warrant for Mike and a search warrant for the house. At the same time the warrants were obtained, crime scene technicians arrived at the scene and started documenting the exterior of the home and the bodies of Kendall and Evan. It was clear at first glance that both of the children had died from a gunshot wound to the head. With the children's bodies was also the body of a black pug which did not have a gunshot wound. Once the fire was out and the house was safe to enter, the crime scene techs began to document the inside of the house. Just inside the house was the body of a black cat, also without a gunshot wound. The walls and ceiling had significant smoke damage and the floor was covered with a few inches of water. As they passed the kitchen, they found a small red gas can with a yellow nozzle next to the kitchen island. In the living room, the body of a small brown dog was found behind a couch. From there, they made their way to the master bedroom, which was completely gutted by the fire. The walls were burned down to the wooden studs and the wood was heavily charred. The bed was burned out with only the bed frame left, and the body of another dog was found on the floor near the bed frame. TJ's body was located in the master closet. Her legs, head, and hands were heavily damaged by the fire. Going upstairs, the techs found blood on the stair railing, which is believed to be where Kendall was shot. There was a small hole in the drywall at the top of the stairs consistent with a bullet. In the upstairs bathroom, techs found a pool of blood on the floor. That was believed to be where Evan was shot. They collected 2 9mm shell casings from the entry of the house and 2 cell phones from the living room. There was 1 9mm projectile in the drywall in the upstairs hallway. There was a single 9mm shell casing in the bathroom. When the techs were finished inside the house, they collected the evidence recovered by the responding officers: a Springfield XD 9mm, a magazine, and 14 rounds of 9mm ammunition. The bodies were transported to the medical examiner's office where the autopsies were performed. The remains of the dogs and cat were collected by animal control. They ended up being 2 pugs, an English bulldog, and an unknown breed of cat. The autopsy of Evans showed that he had been shot once in the top of the head. That bullet traveled down his body and stopped in his left shoulder blade. Kendall had been shot 4 times, all in her head. The first bullet entered her right cheek and exited behind her right ear. The second shot entered into the right side of her head below her ear, traveled through the brain, impacted the adjacent side of the skull and stopped. The third shot was what the doctor described as a keyhole gunshot wound. It entered the right side of her skull at the back of her head and exited on the left side, approximately 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the entrance. The fourth shot entered the base of her skull, traveled through the brain and impacted her forehead and stopped. Both projectiles were recovered by the medical examiner. TJ had been shot 6 times. One of the shots entered her high left shoulder, traveled in a downward motion, went through her spleen, exited her stomach close to her belly button, then re-entered into her thigh and stopped. That projectile was removed by the medical examiner. The second projectile entered under her right breast and exited her left side. The third entered above her left breast, went through her liver and exited the right side of her body. The fourth shot entered around the left shoulder blade and exited out of the right side of her chest. The fifth entered into the middle part of her back at the lower part of the ribs and exited below the right breast. The sixth shot entered into the front part of her head and exited the rear of her head. TJ also had defensive gunshot wounds to both of her hands. She suffered a gunshot wound to her left hand wrist area and her right index finger. 2 of the bullets that went through her body were found in the robe that she had been wearing. When crime scene techs went back to the house to search for more shell casings and projectiles, one 9mm projectile was found concealed in a pool of blood on the stairs, and multiple casings were found under furniture or under the Christmas tree that was still up in the living room. They also found a love letter that had been written by TJ in her office, confirming that she was having an affair. She had been communicating with a man online, but he lived in Costa Rica, and TJ told a friend she knew nothing physical could ever happen. Evidence did show that Mike was aware of the online affair, and a friend said that they had had an open marriage at one point previously. As the investigation went on, authorities learned that Mike was very adamant that they could fix their marriage, and it got to the point where he was being aggressive about staying together, though friends said they didn't know of any physical abuse. When TJ told Mike that their marriage was definitely over, he chose to end the lives of his entire family. There wasn't much question about Mike's guilt. He had confessed to the 911 dispatcher and was found outside the home with the gun used in the murders nearby. It seemed that Mike decided his best chance of getting away with the crime was to claim that he had no memory of committing it. Though he told the dispatcher that he had killed his family, it seems after that he decided he would pretend to not remember the crime, and it was while he was still on the phone with 911 that he started that ruse, which he continued during his interrogation.
I don't want to be arrested, so I feel like I need somebody to help me with what's going on, because I don't have any idea what's going on.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, neither one of us have an idea of what's going on right now either, because we haven't spoke with you yet, if that makes sense.
It does.
So we really don't know. We don't know what's going on. I think our hope was that you would help us figure out what's going on as much as us help you figure out what's going on.
Try, but I don't know what happened.
Are you sound really short of breath. Do you have asthma or medical condition or anything? Or are you just tired?
I'm stressed out.
Just really stressed?
I don't know what's happening.
I just want to clarify before I ask you any questions or you ask me any questions. You said you did understand your rights. You do want to speak with me, correct?
Start, but I don't know. If I start getting overwhelmed, I want somebody that...
You can stop the interview at any time.
We've seen this many times during interrogations. The suspect plays this character that involves them sounding out of breath and talking very meekly, thinking it makes them sound innocent, when it just sounds really fake. Also, I don't think that not remembering committing a crime means that you won't be prosecuted for it, though those are things you need some level of intrapersonal intelligence to understand. It's been claimed that Mike had a high IQ, and even if that's true, it doesn't mean he's smart in all aspects of life. There have been many criminals who have been said to have been highly intelligent in various ways. Some have high IQs, others have gained an advanced degree or become a doctor or passed the bar exam, so it might seem confusing how they made so many stupid mistakes when they committed their crime. Well, there are a lot of different types of intelligence. Some might have strong logical mathematical intelligence, which makes them able to solve problems logically in a more clinical setting. Someone like that might be able to get an engineering or chemistry degree, but not be smart in a setting where they need to deal with other people. They would need interpersonal intelligence and intrapersonal intelligence, which helps people understand the actions of others and themselves. Someone like Mike, who had the intelligence to get an engineering degree and be successful working for a defense contractor, likely didn't have the type of intelligence that would help him deal with the investigators of his crime. It's the difference between book smarts and street smarts. There are a lot of people who are very smart on a school level and have a ton of knowledge that can be very useful in certain settings. But it's not the same as someone who has a lot of life experience and has a lot of knowledge about how the world works and how to deal with human behavior. Ted Bundy would be a good example of a killer with a high IQ who also had a good amount of interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence. There's also a theory that people have intelligent thought, which is based on their cognitive capacity, and rational thought, which is their ability to make effective decisions. Just because someone's highly intelligent doesn't mean they're highly rational. You can be a brain surgeon and still make the terrible decision to kill your spouse when they threaten to leave you. So, though Mike was likely extremely smart in some aspect, he lacked intelligence in an area that would have benefited him during the investigation.
Why do you think we're here today? I'm confused on why we are here. You don't remember anything from today?
I think I can think of is the other day my wife was, we've been working lately. We've been struggling a little bit. I've been trying to work on it. I was going to counseling. I haven't been in a few weeks, but I've been going to counseling, and I'm struggling. Saturday night, she had one of the guns and was saying that her only way out.
Say that one more time.
She said the only way out was to basically kill herself, and I wouldn't leave the room. And I wouldn't leave her alone. And I kept trying to get the gun away from her. And after about 2 hours, I got it away from her. But told me that, basically if I called in to try to get her some help, they'd take her nursing license away. I didn't know what to do. Her best friend came over, and she ended up staying the night. Maybe that was Sunday night, because she was there all day Monday when we were working. And I've been watching. I've been afraid that she was going to hurt herself. I hid the guns.
It seemed that Mike was making an effort to make it sound like TJ had committed the murders of their children and taken her own life. He said she had a gun and was talking about it being the only way out. Then he conveniently doesn't remember what happened leading up to the house being on fire and the gun being in his hand. Sure. Of course, his act doesn't really help him, so he asked for a lawyer and stopped the interrogation. That was when the detective informed him that he was going to be arrested for capital murder, and Mike took the opportunity to put on a dramatic performance for the climax of this fictional story he was trying to tell.
I'm in over my head. Can I talk to a lawyer, please?
One more time, sir.
Can I talk to a lawyer, please? I'm in so far over my head. I don't know what's happening.
Okay. That's perfectly your right to do so, sir. We can get you an attorney and then speak with you after you have an attorney.
Getting confused.
Okay.
By your questions. I'm sorry.
You're perfectly fine. You are going to be under arrest, okay? And you're going to be taken over to the Collin County Jail.
I'm under arrest.
You're going to be under arrest for capital murder.
Excuse me?
Capital murder.
No.
You caught me a minute ago whenever I used past tense instead of present tense.
Oh, no. We're not.
The investigator had asked him how old Kendall was earlier in the interview, and Mike had picked up on the fact that he used the past tense. The detective brushed it off at the time, but it was part of Mike's act that he had no memory of what had happened, which was very unbelievable. He had mentioned killing his family on the 911 call, At the scene, he had told the officers that he didn't know where his kids were, but he told someone else that Kendall was on the stairs, which was where she was found. The house was on fire and was completely filled with thick black smoke. There was no reason to think the kids weren't in the house, and the logical conclusion was that they were inside and had at least died in the fire. His bad acting peaked when the detective confirmed that Kendall was dead.
It's not true. Please tell me it's not true. Please.
Are you talking to me or yourself?
Please tell me it's not true.
Your daughter is deceased.
No! I would never.
Mike's act that he didn't remember anything about the murder of his family did him no favors. It showed that he was completely remorseless about his actions and was only thinking about protecting himself. It's believed that Mike thought he could kill his family and get away with it to relieve himself of responsibility. It's no coincidence that Mike had previously sprained his ankle, making him unable to deploy in the Marines, and he's clearly the type of person who doesn't want to actually put in any work when things get difficult. Michael Paton ended up pleading guilty to capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyer claimed that he took the deal to spare family the agony of a trial, but it's most likely that he took the deal to not get the death penalty. Mike clearly is not the type of person who cares about the feelings of others. You don't gun down your wife and teen children over your wife wanting a divorce because you care about other people's feelings. Michael Paton only cared about Michael Paton to the point of ending the lives of the people who loved him the most. That is the perfect description of a monster. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.